This is WCN, the Whole Care Network. You talk, we listen. Content presented on the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed during this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent views of the Whole Care Network. Always consult your physician for medical and fitness advice, and always consult your attorney for legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Welcome to Island Treasures, a place to hear caregiving stories from actual caregivers who are walking their own caregiving journey. This podcast is brought to you by Alongside Caregiver Consulting from beautiful Vancouver Island in British Columbia, Canada, and I am your host, Alison Van Schie. Today you will hear Dennis Dulniak's caregiving journey. Dennis joins me from Florida. He has been the caregiver and loving husband of his wife Nancy, who now resides in a memory care facility. Welcome, Dennis. Thanks for joining me today.
Great. Glad to be with you. We do have an update on Nancy.
Okay.
She was in a memory care facility, but on last week, she was tested positive for COVID, along with a number of other residents. And on Sunday, she and 10 others were moved from the memory care community into a rehabilitation unit that was established to be a memory care rehab unit in the Orlando area. She's doing well in terms of symptoms. She has fatigue, which she seemed to have had before COVID, but we think that the fatigue she's having is indicative of a COVID symptom. But all the other symptoms, thank God, are normal. And so we hope that she will get through this quarantine period and be able to return to the memory care community.
Okay, yeah, our hearts go out to you on that. COVID is so scary, and so many unknowns. So about Nancy's diagnosis, we've already touched upon memory care. So could you tell me a little bit about her memory issues and what her diagnosis is?
Yes. The diagnosis occurred late in her career. She has been a catalog librarian for decades. And those who are familiar with being a catalog librarian know the intensity and accuracy that job requires. And she was meticulous at that position. And she was exhibiting problems of losing passwords or blaming somebody for moving things and losing track of what was happening. And her frustration coming home from work was just getting unbearable. And we figured financially we could afford for her to retire. And so we made that decision. And so on April 1st, April Fool's Day, she retired. And it was only after she retired that we then took her to get the full battery of neuropsychological exams, which took 8 hours over 2 days. And it's from that we got a diagnosis that she had mild cognitive impairment. When we heard the diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, the doctor also indicated in his report that she has a disability and should no longer be working. And it was that shock that said, why did I not do this before she retired? Because people have long-term disability insurance plans when they work.
Yes, for that very reason.
But yet, both of us did not recognize the fact, nor had we heard that mild cognitive impairment or even Alzheimer's was a disability, just as it is a disease. And so it was from that we then began some significant intrusion efforts on helping her with her cognitive abilities. And it was then that we started learning that Nancy was really having issues with short-term memory, trying to learn new things. And we kept working on how do we maintain a level of functionality
Right.
for as long as we could. We went through a number of explorations and services that we happen to have in Central Florida, and we're blessed from the fact that Central Florida seems to have a proliferation of services that support Alzheimer's and dementia. And it was from that we learned that there was a brain fitness program that Nancy could enroll in,
Wow.
which was kind of an adult daycare, but really a curriculum-based program designed to keep a person who is having cognitive issues with Alzheimer's and dementia as functional as possible, keep them stimulated. And so Nancy actually did participate in that for 4 years. But we also enrolled in a number of drug trial programs.
Okay.
And among the earlier programs, she received the PET scans, she received the spinal tap, confirming the fact that she did in fact have early onset Alzheimer's at age 62. Now, the history behind this is her mother had dementia and passed away at age 86. And so it was not unusual to have dementia in the family, but to receive a diagnosis in the early 60s was definitely a shock, not only to us, but also to her 3 older sisters.
Oh, yeah.
Who are also having some memory issues through it all. And so she was tested for the gene, the APOE4 gene, which could be indicative of a genetic carry through.
Okay.
And although the study did not want to share that information with us, I was able to get the information because it's important to us as well as our 2 boys, as well as to the sisters, that if in fact Nancy's carrying the gene, it may be important that they are potentially carrying the gene as well. And although it's not a definite, if you have the APOE4 gene, it certainly is a higher potential of having Alzheimer's. And now we're learning through some studies that the incidence of early onset Alzheimer's has increased 83% among people with young Alzheimer's who are between the ages of 30 and 65. And so Nancy was in that category, and we're seeing more of that.
Staggering numbers, so staggering. And with early testing and your boys knowing if they have the gene, then they could find out before they retire. And so they would be able to get disability if need be down the road.
Yep, that is something I do recommend. And they have not been tested for the gene. They are not sure they want to be tested for the gene. And I highly recommend that anybody who may have that in the family make sure that they get their insurances checked out before that test comes in, because although this information should be protected, insurance companies seem to have a way of gaining access to such information, and it's possible that they may deny people with this gene, or their rates may suddenly escalate with this gene. And so long-term care insurance, life insurance policies should be reviewed before any gene testing is done on a person. And it's just one of those unfortunate, life-changing pieces of information that we need to deal with.
But great advice to share to our listeners today. Great advice.
And I've shared the information about getting tested before one quits a job or retires. And I've actually been able to save disability insurance on at least two people that I know of. And I'm grateful that my experience has been able to benefit them.
Oh, and I'm sure they're grateful too. That's good insight. And like I say, great advice to share. Wow. So that's the diagnosis, and it sounds like a lot of intensive testing, those 8 hours of figuring out what was going on and then receiving the cognitive impairment diagnosis.
It was a
And
lot of testing. And we participating in all the drug trials added to the amount of testing and clinical aspects we were doing.
yeah,
But it was all for the good of science that we were doing this, with the hope that it would also benefit Nancy. Of the 8 drug trials she participated in, none of them proved beneficial in terms of advancing the science to an FDA-approved drug. But at the same time, we were doing something. We weren't just sitting back and feeling sorry for ourselves. We were trying to help other people too.
yeah. And even speaking with me today, you're helping other people. So again, thank you.
And I highly encourage people who have loved ones and family members and friends who are having some issues to really get fully checked out by not only their GP, their primary care physician, who may or may not be as familiar with dementia. But as it goes forth, to get checked out by more specialists who do have that familiarity, and explore those options, because it may not be Alzheimer's. It may not be a form of dementia. It may well be a vitamin deficiency. It may be an imbalance in one's iodine count. Number of factors come into play on this.
And so you can rule those out before switching the panic. Oh no, it's dementia. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about what your life was like for you and Nancy before you said she had this very detailed job career and was meticulous at it. But what about your life together? What was that like, if you don't mind sharing?
No, not at all. We married after we graduated from college, and we have 2 boys who have 1 grandson each for us. They don't live close, and so we don't have the benefits of having close family in our nuclear family, but we're very active in terms of supportive culture through numerous plays that we just loved seeing, live theater and live music and live sports. And what surprised me was Nancy's passion that she seemed to display vocally when she would go to basketball and football games. And one of our prides was actually going to 6 Final Fours for college basketball, and actually loved doing that. But it became apparent with the disease that the noise factor and the crowds were no longer going to be beneficial for her.
Mm.
And so that was a sad moment when I could no longer take her to a game, and I would have to either go myself or just forego that experience. But we were very active indeed, a good social life. It was a good 47 years of marriage that we have been in. And so the difficulty we're now facing is being apart, the separation, the fact that I can no longer really share my life with her has been sad.
Yeah.
And her ability to connect is quickly diminishing. And that's just been difficult to experience. I lose a part of her every day. And her inability to connect to some of the technology has been more difficult. I do have a positive that actually happened just this week when she actually did talk with me on the telephone in her new rehabilitation center. And I did ask her a question of, are you in pain?
Hmm.
Because for COVID, it's a headache that could be a symptom.
Okay.
And she clearly said no.
Oh.
And I was so happy to hear that, because she had difficulty actually answering questions with me before. And so I was very pleased about that.
Yeah.
But we've had a very, very good life together. After the diagnosis, we did a lot of travel.
Okay.
And she loved to travel. And so going on cruises were just the next plan. And she would actually get engaged in the planning of that.
Awesome.
And I would even ask her about some of the side activities, and she would frequently make a decision which one she would prefer to go on.
Nice. So the excursions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun. And from each of these cruises, I actually did a picture book once we got home. And the picture books were based upon my postings on Facebook, who I happen to have a large sector of friends
Mm.
who followed us vicariously, because I love to share the positives that we made after the diagnosis.
Oh,
And
those memories, the treasures. You captured them in photo books, and then hopefully she gets to see those still.
I try, but she no longer can connect.
Oh dear, yes.
It's sad that her connection has dropped off so significantly. Now it's an occasional picture that I could show her.
Okay.
But it used to be that she would take these books and share these with people after our cruise, and yet she couldn't remember the details of the cruise. And so
But there was a feeling that she had that was happy, and
oh, absolutely.
that's what she wanted to
Absolutely.
share. Hmm.
And so it's that being in the moment that we hear about and I treasure, because one of my pet phrases as I was early on in some of the support groups was that we have good days and bad moments. Now, I try to minimize those bad moments, and those bad moments are the frustration points that I would have when she asked the same question for the third and fourth time.
Yeah.
When she challenged me to find something that she had put somewhere, and we created little missions of trying to find this, and then finding items in odd locations. She used to blame these missing locations on a poltergeist that we would have in the house. And so I would play along too and use the poltergeist excuse, even to the point we brought a priest into the house to bless the house and ward our house of these evil poltergeists, which seemed to help for a while. And so the difficulty I had as a caregiver had been in how do we overcome the frustration points? And I learned relatively early on that I was encountering what's called perpetual grief.
Yes.
Or ambiguous grief.
Yes.
It's the slow loss of an individual from this disease that you can't predict or prepare for. Because with each loss of her functionality, it was more responsibility that I, as a caregiver, had to assume.
So the balance went from Nancy on to Dennis. It sounds to me like you were able to turn some of your frustrations into a positive, like bringing the priest in and not playing along with it, but helping her feel that her concerns were valid.
Mm-hmm. It was. We have to put ourselves in the shoes of the person with this disease to better help them feel like they have a support system too.
Right.
And it's through that very careful understanding that was very, very important. And that's why I love doing support groups at this point in facilitating them. I facilitate a men's group that I find very helpful because frequently men are not willing to share and get involved. And so by bringing this group together, it's been helpful for me too. It's therapeutic because I can share my current experiences, which are unfortunately way too rich in terms of actualization.
Mm.
But trying to deal with that and gain their support too has been helpful to me because with this disease, caregivers can't be feeling like they're alone. And that is a frequent response that they just don't know where to turn.
Yeah.
And the support group gives them that support that's so necessary.
Yeah. I completely concur. It's amazing. And it's just such a wealth of wisdom and insight and just the support. Like, if you could use a better word than support, I don't know what it would be, but it's just so wonderful to see and to be a part of.
Well, I think we're a parachute for each other.
There you go.
Want to use that? Use that analogy?
Yes, thank you. You've just touched upon a question that I have about what is the most rewarding aspect of being a caregiver, and you've just talked about the richness of coming together in a support group. Is there any other aspect that you would deem rewarding?
You know, it's an interesting question you pose. And in reflecting upon where Nancy is now, my love for her has never wavered. It's gotten stronger. And that's a tough aspect because it's a bittersweet story we have. And I know she can't express that.
Yeah, it's a cruel, cruel disease. And we can only talk now as caregivers, but just imagine what it's like for her. The fear, the long goodbye that she's the long loss.
You know, we think it might be tougher. I came across a book just within the last week called Unmasking Alzheimer's. And it's written by a person in New York State who has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And she has actually created 32 masks and explains the decorations on the mask of what it feels like to have this disease. And I've just been emailing her this week because I found it exceptional on how descriptive she has been and touches upon so many facets of this disease. We wonder what is going on inside their head. And she has been able to actually put that in writing for us.
Wow.
And she has now given me approval to utilize this in my support groups. And so I guess later I will share some more details with you of how to order this book.
Oh, fascinating. I think you have a lot of resources. I don't want spoilers until you actually share what you've been busy doing. Personally, I think you've got a lot of cool things that you're cooking up.
Yes, indeed. It's one that, because my career spanned 40 years in higher education, to where I was actually an executive administrator at universities as the registrar, that I've developed a lot of skill sets and resources that pull upon a network of what's available to us. And so I've been really benefiting from the fact that being retired, which is a decision I made very shortly after Nancy's diagnosis, to spend time with her, to utilize the time we had to the chief prospect of keeping her as functional for as long as we could. And it was only through my retirement that we were able to explore as much as we do in travel that really benefited us. Things moved along as her disease progressed as well.
But you're right, though, with that being a hub of resources and knowing where to tap into them, I think is why I became a caregiver consultant, was because I saw such a gap. People didn't know how to get the helps they needed. And you're actually putting a lot more into, these are resources, and they're really cool resources. And listeners, you have to stay tuned because they're going to be explained later.
Ooh, you're giving them some hints.
I am. Yeah. So, Dennis, you are a support. You're a support for other people, but what supports, you've touched upon the support group, but what supports personally do you have, either formal or informal?
Well, while Nancy was still in my house with me, we were part of couples support groups. I went to support groups on my own. She participated in her brain fitness that gave me respite.
Yeah.
Because as caregivers, we need to have our time as well. And although it's a 24/7 commitment for so many people who have their loved ones at home with them, you still need to have your own time. And so while she was still at home with me, I was still very active with the Lions, to where I still felt comfortable leaving her at home for short periods of time until I could no longer leave her at home for short periods of time. And so then my support system incorporated hiring companionship for her to come into the house and be with her and give her activities while I was away doing my other service work that was vitally important to me.
Yeah.
And so I was very, very happy with that, but it got to the point where the difficulty of her living at home with me became way too challenging and stressful. And the most difficult decision to be made was placing her into a memory care community. And I actually planned that out 7 months before actualizing that move without letting her know.
Mm.
Now, she had been at this facility because we've had support groups there. She actually participated in some of the activities there, so it was not foreign to her. And that decision that people need to make of placing their loved one is a very, very hard one. As I say, it was the hardest decision I had to make in our marriage. The life I had with Nancy was never going to be there again, and I had to take care of myself.
So Dennis, even with all the planning that you put into that decision, it still was the hardest decision you had to make. And it sounds extremely emotional as well. So tell me a little bit more about the supports you had, including the caregiving consultant supports and other supports you found helpful.
Well, one of the main pieces that I found for support has been in a number of support groups that I had been participating in. And it was through a bunch of seminars handled locally where I came into contact with a caregiver consultant who I actually encouraged to join our dementia-friendly cruises we were doing, because I thought her content was so important in terms of sharing what the stages of caregiving were, which was her basic framework. And so Tony Gittles was invited to be a speaker on one of our dementia-friendly cruises that Nancy and I had participated in. And she was dynamic on the cruise in relating and then facilitating support groups for caregivers on that cruise while the loved one was actually engaged in activities. And so the need for a caregiver consultant became very important to me because it conceptualized what was happening to support what I was doing. And then through Tony, I got invited to attend the National Caregiving Conference, where I learned so much about advocacy that it upped my level of engagement and confidence to do more and more. And so now, with that behind me, I have this confidence and this wealth of resource where I can now take this and share with others. Because the fact that we as caregivers do not ever consider the fact that we are alone is so vitally important.
Mm-hmm.
And as a man, we don't necessarily have the same networking communication structures that women do, nor do we have that openness that I have experienced among women. And so I've kind of been an anomaly in some of these caregiving groups, but still willing to share. And now I have a very rich men's support group where I can share this. And they help me too, because at today's session, the first question was, Dennis, how are you doing now that Nancy is in a COVID unit?
Mm-hmm.
And the appreciation, the love, the concern there has been very, very important to me. And so I share the caregiving consultancy. I shared Tony's book with them, Tony's article on the 21 mistakes that caregivers make. And it's just information that we need to be open to and sharing among various groups.
So Dennis, I need to share with our listeners that I'm grinning from ear to ear right now because it's because of Tony Gittles and the networking of caregiver consultants that I became aware of you as a caregiver and was able to make the connection and have this interview. So big shout out to Tony, and yes, she's an amazing caregiver consultant, and the network is pretty cool with all of us caregiver consultants in mostly North America, but I think we stretch out to other countries as well in the world. So it's a need that has been identified, and caregiver consultants are there to help. So I'm so glad that you've got someone that helps you be honest and helps you share resources and your feelings.
Indeed, and I'm most appreciative.
That's great. So besides the support groups and caregiver consultants, what have you found to be also beneficial for your own well-being?
Well, it's interesting that with Nancy in memory care, I was able to stay very active in Lions and expand upon some of the services that we've been doing and not have to worry about having her taken care of, because she was in a safe environment, a supportive environment, and I had openness to be able to go visit her. Well, in being able to take her out to meals from her memory care community, we actually visited a restaurant frequently where we got to know the owners. And it was from an article that my son sent to me from the LinkedIn post on dementia-friendly dining that linked the idea that this restaurant that Nancy and I would be visiting, which was a homegrown Italian restaurant, that she enjoyed the food, but the association was so keen there. Well, the owner and one of the major cooks there has a family connection to Alzheimer's.
Okay.
And in talking to her, they were more than willing to be my first dementia-friendly dining restaurant in Central Florida.
Mm.
And in connecting with another major support group in the Orlando area, we got sponsorship, and I got sponsorship and support from the statewide organization. And lo and behold, in January of this year, 2020, we announced and released our first dementia-friendly dining restaurant in Central Florida.
So tell me a little bit about what makes it dementia friendly. Is it the service? Like, just fill in a few of the blanks there for me.
Sure. One of the key things we looked for in restaurants was a back room, so that the back room could be set aside at a specific day and time to host families who have loved ones with Alzheimer's or dementia.
Okay.
This restaurant did have a back room. They had owners who were very familiar with Alzheimer's. They were willing to have us come in and train their wait staff on what's different about serving a person with dementia, sensitizing them and making that experience positive. So we have a very safe area without judgment, with trained personnel willing to take whatever time it would need to serve a person and their family. And the richness of that was phenomenal. I had lined up 3 other restaurants to do this after the success of the opening until COVID hit.
Right. That darn COVID.
And so,
having a restaurant to go out to is such a special treat. So that must have made Nancy feel very special, and you as well, because you get to go out as a couple and just enjoy what you used to enjoy when things were not dementia tainted.
yes, and they were inviting long-term care units and memory care units to bring in and bus people in during this time because it was a safe environment.
Yes.
It was beautiful.
Nice.
So that worked until March.
Yeah.
And then come March, it just kind of folded. But then in May, there was a TV segment showing masks, face masks, with a clear opening for the mouth so that people who were deaf or hearing impaired could read lips. Well, our Lions group picked up on that, had a seamstress as part of our club who did prototypes, and we started offering these clear face masks and face shields to families of deaf and hearing impaired people.
Fabulous.
We expanded that beyond just the deaf and hearing impaired to include autism,
Oh, yes.
Down syndrome, and dementia.
Yeah.
Because we recognized, based on a Zoom call I had with Nancy, that she paid more attention to me if I was wearing a mask where she could actually see my mouth move. And so we added dementia to our categories.
Wow.
And in the last 6 months, we have now sent out over 1,400 clear face masks to individuals who are now being able to read lips and see full facial expressions, because behind that mask, you can't see if they're smiling or frowning or what is there. And so very, very happy that I have a team of 25 sewers and seamstresses who create these for our Lions Hearing program. And it has brought in nearly 2/3 the cost through donations because the cost of materials and postage and the fact that we use a 2-sided no fog plastic is what makes it different. It doesn't fog up, and it's a beautiful thing.
Sounds very effective. Do you have a link to your Lions Hearing program that you could add at the end of this podcast? Or
I do. It's going to come to the request form I have, or actually it's going to come to an email that goes with my Lions Club, our hearing program. We don't have a website for this, but it's a email to our Lions Hearing program. And our Lions Hearing program is designed to serve Central Florida.
Okay.
But I can tell you, with the number of TV segments and radio segments I have done that have included NPR, it has even branched into Canada. Groups asking for information on how do we do this.
Well, it might just be branching more now.
Well, the last request I got from Canada was in Newfoundland.
Oh, wow.
So let's
Yeah.
go coast to coast with you, Allison.
That's it. Totally the West Coast now. That's awesome. Yeah. So, and if there is a website, you said there is no website, but if there is an email, I can always add that to notes afterwards for folks who might be interested in ordering, making a request.
Well, I'd be happy to share the pattern. We do not sell Lions. Lions never charge for our services, and our program is strictly designed for Central Florida, but I am more than willing to share the pattern, the guides, and even the plastic for a nominal cost that covers shipping.
Yep. We'll add that in the notes after. That's fabulous. You do have a lot of things going on, like the dementia-friendly dining, the face masks, and you made references to two amazing books that I'd like you to share a little bit more about with our listeners as well.
Yeah, one of the books, I just learned of this through a summit that was done by Us Against Alzheimer's. It's called Unmasking Alzheimer's. And it's a book written by a woman who was diagnosed initially with mild cognitive impairment and then confirmed to have Alzheimer's. And I find her amazing because she has created 32 masks with descriptions that talk about what it feels like to have Alzheimer's and the experiences behind it. These masks truly represent a very unique and descriptive way of what experiences that Dr. Hummel is undergoing, and happy to share that information. The second book was vital to me because as a man, I struggled with what is going on in my life in understanding Alzheimer's and relationships. And one of the journalists that I've come across, a CBS News reporter, Barry Peterson, wrote a book called Jan's Story. And he wrote this book 10 years ago. As a matter of fact, Barry still broadcasts on CBS Sunday morning. And I just saw him on a segment. His story talks about his wife, Jan Peterson, who is also a journalist. Again, a gifted professional who encountered Alzheimer's and wondered what was going on. And it talks about their relationship, their life together, the difficult decision that Barry Peterson faced, like I did, of having to place his wife into a memory care community because he realized that it was just too hard on him personally, physically, and emotionally to be able to take care of her 24/7 and still do the kind of activities that he wanted to engage in, and that was his professional career.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was my career as a Lion, my service work, the fact that though I loved Nancy and still do, it's a matter of life must go on. And that he talked about the relationship of what his marriage to Jan felt like, that because I was also experiencing similar feelings and receiving counseling, it described parallels for me that were very, very clear. And without going into the details there, I'm willing to meet individually with anybody who wants to talk further about it. But it was very, very important in helping me understand what I was going to do after Nancy's Alzheimer's has put her into memory care, and I still have a life and existence for myself.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like that book was really relatable to you and had some really good nuggets that you could take and draw strength from.
Very much so, and I highly recommend that to men who are married and really struggling
mm-hmm.
with taking care of their wives at home, and then once you have to get placed into care community.
Mm-hmm. So are there any other nuggets that you have that you can share about what you're involved with? Like, you're very proactive and creative, I'm sensing.
Well, I appreciate the compliments. The fact that I am so engaged and willing and open to share this is what I find therapeutic. And more than happy to continue sharing this, because unfortunately, dementia is not going to end. It is going to increase, and we need to make the fact that the stigma of Alzheimer's and the myths about dementia need to be dispelled and openly discussed among families and friends so that people don't feel alone, that people have a support system, because life does not end with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And Nancy and I were living proof to that. We had a tremendously rich life for nearly 5 years after her diagnosis, before her being placed in memory care, and then life continued once she was in memory care. Our dementia-friendly dining experiences were enriching in environments that helped share that information. And so I offer encouragement to others listening to this blog that there definitely is hope. And I know with some drugs that are going to be coming out in 2021 for those who were diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, there will be some hope on the horizon here that will be hopefully approved by the FDA in the United States and hopefully other countries as well.
You just seem to draw, like you talked earlier about resources and being the hub of networking and what's available, and you really are pointing people in the right direction for resources. So I thank you for that. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Maybe chapter 2 in a couple of months, Allison.
Chapter 2 sounds fabulous. I think there will be a chapter 2. Well, Dennis, I do thank you for sharing your insights today. I really do appreciate you taking the time to speak with me, to speak with our listeners, to share that wisdom you have, to help people explore their reality as well and not be afraid to reach out. And so I do thank you.
You're welcome.
As promised, here are the resources Dennis referenced in the interview. For information on the clear face masks through Central Florida Lions Hearing Program, you can contact Dennis by email at centralfloridalionshearing@gmail.com. For information on dementia-friendly dining, you can check out the website www.centralfloridadementia-friendlydining.com. The 2 books he mentioned are Unmasking Alzheimer's, The Memories Behind the Masks by Dr. Cynthia Huling-Hummel. Huling is spelled Huling. Hummel is spelled Hummel, and that's available through Amazon. And Barry Peterson's book, Jan's Story, Love Lost to the Long Goodbye of Alzheimer's. If you are listening to this podcast and find yourself in the midst of your own caregiving journey and need some supports, tap into Alongside Caregiver Consulting as a resource at